There is addressing standard gray split. And then there's nobody in talk equals trouble. It's like a collaboration between the two. And then we have Brandon Auger's radio transmission piece, Wasaksing Sniper. I'm hoping I'm pronouncing that right. Hat if Natar. And if I'm pronouncing that right, it's a Swedish name. And then we have Brian Schussler's release, which I think he...
Hello and welcome to White Centipede Noise Podcast, where we give language and a face to noise through long-form video interviews with those involved. I'm Oscar Brummel, and today my guest is Chris Gibson, a figure of Canadian noise who runs the label Buried in Slag and Debris and the zine Untitled. I'm in a brand new space here. This is the new White Centipede Noise Studios in Potsdam, a city adjacent to Berlin. It is going to be a noise-exclusive record store and podcast studio. As you can see, it's still raw and empty. I'm just beginning to set it up with furniture for in-person podcast interviews, a large record collection that I'm shipping over from my original collection in Minneapolis, and just getting it set up to be a comfy, cozy noise work store / studio. Huge thanks to everyone who supports the podcast and label and brought us this far. There's a lot left to do, but I'm hoping to have a February grand opening. End of February, there'll be an announcement. Everyone will be invited to come check it out. If you want to support this operation, you can go to patreon.com/White Centipede Noise. That's the best long-term way to support this. You can also place an order at whitecentipedenoise.com. There are label releases and fundraising bundles. You can also make a donation through PayPal, which is always appreciated. Without further ado, let's get now to Chris. This, by the way, is part 1 of the interview with Chris. This is the shorter, abridged version. The full episode is available at patreon.com/White Centipede Noise. All right, Chris, hello and welcome to White Centipede Noise Podcast.
Oscar, thanks for having me.
Appreciate it. Today, as you can see, I am not in my normal setup. I'm on the couch.
Yeah.
Because I'm breaking down the studio and setting up in the new White Centipede Noise storefront where I'll be doing my interviews and stuff like that. So everything's kind of in between right now. So I'm chilling on the couch today.
I like it.
Could have done a little more to make the background look nice. That little tag hang from the shade is going to bother me, but that's all right.
I got bags over stuff behind me.
Well, you've got cool tape machines and stuff in the background. What are the bags for?
So it gets really dusty up in this studio, and we also we have a cat that comes up here and he loves to lay on everything. So usually when I'm not using stuff, I throw bags over it. Well,
so before we get into the details, why don't you introduce yourself briefly, who you are and what you do?
Yeah, sure. My name's Chris Gibson, and I do a handful of things. I guess the main editor, creator of Untitled. There were 2 other editors that worked for me when I started as well, or started with me, and so it's now just me. And then I also run a label called Buried in Slag and Debris. And then I play as RHODA here and there, and then I also am part of a small collective in town here that runs experimental nights. It's not always just noise. It's basically people doing different things. Like quite often it can be noisy, but sometimes it can also fit into some other genres that don't kind of get regular spaces to play.
And when you say in town, where is that?
Halifax, Nova Scotia. Yeah. Halifax, Nova Scotia, Canada. I guess if people are watching from different countries.
So Untitled Zine is one of the main things you do, and you've got a new issue coming out soon. Why don't you tell us about that one?
Sure. Yeah. So this is the 5-year issue. I guess it's issue 9, but we hit the 5-year mark. This issue, I have a proof.
Oh, wow. Cool.
So we have an interview with Relay for Death, and there is, we usually do kind of like a art showcase So there is one with Small Cruel Party, a bunch of outtake drawings from one of the albums he did on Harboring Sound. Taylor and Aaron from Initial Shock did kind of like a recap. Kate Riziak interviewed Harlow McFarlane, works with sound in movies and various other bands. I think also makeup. I think he did work on Long Legs.
Cool.
Recently with Nicolas Cage. Got ZK, Susanna, who did some stuff on the Rita's label and also Taylor's third exposition. So she showed some artwork as well. So she's the other kind of artist showcase. We have you, Oscar, giving your top 5 and some descriptions in there.
Yes.
There's an interview with New Grasping Machina. And then I have Tim Olive interviewing Kea Nakata. I think I'm hoping I'm pronouncing that right. And he is a Japanese noise artist who works with circuit boards and kind of like stacks and connects them. They're almost like, they almost look like trees. And there's usually like a film review section every issue. And I got Phil Blankenship he reviewed kind of like a series of films, so instead of just one film. And then a local artist who I put out a tape before, Brandon Auger, who also plays as a project called Panilla, and he has been working with radio towers over the last year. And so there's also a tape that's one of the tapes that are coming out that I'm working on now as well. So probably for the last year, he's been like exploring very isolated towers, kind of like within Nova Scotia, and kind of tapping into transmissions. So
wow, like functioning towers.
Functioning, yeah. So I interviewed him specifically just on the towers. Like there's a little bit of questions about his other work, and then the tape I think he talks about the tape that's coming out as well. But I kind of asked him a handful of questions about his work with, or his like interest in radio towers. The zine's like maybe 1 or 2 artists short, but it's bigger than the last issue. Everyone wrote more in this one, so it's up a couple pages.
It seems to me like you also place a lot of importance on other artists conducting interviews.
Yep.
or writing. Is that true? Like Kate is doing an interview, for example, you said, and
yeah, Kate's been a regular lately. But she lives in town here now. She moved her and Michael moved to the East Coast. So
right.
So the last this is her 3rd interview, I think. Yeah, I think she's done 3 now with Untitled. And so I think there was 2 editors. Like the zine started with me and Stephen Tate was the other original editor. So that's how the zine started. Noah Gadke was the editor that replaced Stephen, but Noah had been writing from issue 1. He had always wrote a piece. And I think when we started the zine, I think at that time we didn't have anyone, maybe like other artists, interview other artists. That kind of slowly moved. We slowly started kind of moving in that direction, but we wanted people to write as well. Like I think, we had a handful of different ideas, and I think Stephen parted after the 2nd issue, and Noah took over, and also kind of like we would have guest interviewers as well, or people writing. I really like when people write too. So it's like, but it's hard to sometimes get people to do it, and I try to get at least 1 or 2, or like especially people that are working with various ways of archiving the community, like noise, sound art, concrete music, or music concrete. And
what does your work as an editor entail?
Probably mine is more curation. I also do all the design, the visuals. I try to keep kind of like, I guess, like a consistency that makes Untitled Zine. So usually if I ask someone to interview someone, I let them pick the artist, and maybe I think the only thing I usually ask maybe is like that they run it by me, just to make sure that I don't think like someone's interviewing them at the same time if I know of, or it's more just to make sure there's not like an oversaturation or something like that. And then, I mean, editing's kind of all, like I have a handful of people that help with like proofreading, editing, and then usually like I'm reading it over and over again. So I definitely miss some grammar, or like, it's also hard to make things kind of like consistent with, especially when people are like interviewing people from different countries, and like,
Sure.
like there's American grammar, British grammar, you know what I mean? Like, it's just like, I think, yeah, I just try to do the best I can. And it's also fine as long as like the answers are consistent with one person, or the questions are like, I'm fine if someone does something one way, or like spells color, with an OU instead of an O. Like, I try not to stress about it. It's a zine. It's not The Wire or something, like, I'm not.
Why is it important for you to be involved in this kind of subculture or genre, however you want to look at it, as a curator, compiler, journalist? I know you're an artist as well, but you seem to really thrive and hold a lot of importance in that role in what you do, both with the label and the zine. What drives you to do that?
I just love, I love anyone making like something that's different or challenging, or like, I love different sounds, and I don't know. I think it's hard to keep your head above and do these things. So I don't know. To me, you need a handful of people kind of like helping and keeping things moving, and kind of like, I don't know, like I think it's I just think it's really important, or it's important to me anyway. And I don't know, I try to curate things that I would like to see, or would want to read about. And I also like, I don't know, I think there's like anyone who's kind of documenting these things, or writing about them, there's a place for everyone. And it's like, to me, it's like a family connection in some sort of weird way. Whether people like agree on the same thing or disagree or whatever, it's like, it's just the general love for it, I guess.
Do you see yourself with the zine focusing on documenting like what exists and just showing it? Or are you also like consciously trying to put something like a vision of your own, or some sort of example of what your ideal or your wish?
I mean, I think there's me in there, but like, I think also like when I invite someone to write something or do something, that's also where it kind of steers in a different direction, and I'm fine with it. Like, unless someone like writes something that's like super shitty or something, and I'm like, yeah, like, I'm not gonna publish, something that's like that. Or, but I haven't had anyone that I've worked with that I've had that situation happen. So, but like, yeah, like, I definitely have my own ideas and stuff like that. But I think having other people there and writing or talking about something else, or interviewing someone that they want to interview, also kind of like brings a zine, so that, it's not just me. It's kind of like moving a handful of topics and areas, that some stuff that maybe I would not think about, or like, I don't know.
You mentioned the aesthetic, and you just did maybe the first color reveal of this issue number 9.
Yeah, I did. I did make one post with it. I usually change the color. The color literally just has to do with what paper supply I can get. The paper supply situation is like terrible, especially like post-pandemic, especially like if you're using any professional printer. It's really bad. It's like, I have like, I basically, I mostly work with 2 printers. They're like work related, and they basically, one printer forwarded me just to like the main paper supplier, because they got annoyed with me like just asking so many questions. So I'm basically down to like maybe 1 or 2 more papers available, without having to like, I mean, you can get different papers, but you have to buy either like a quantity that's way larger than what the print run is, or like get them milled or something stupid. And it's like, so I might have to start recycling color. So I think pink was like one of the, like, when I contact her, I'm like, here's all the colors I've used so far. And she's she's like, we've got a pink, and I can't remember, it was like an ivory. So I swapped to a pink. I don't know.
Yeah.
I tried to get like a metallic one. I can get some smaller metallic colors still, but yeah, like I could get them for J cards and stuff like that. But yeah, without buying like a massive amount that doesn't make sense, that I'd be stuck with for like a decade or something like that.
I have a question from a Patreon supporter
Sure.
about your art style.
Mm-hmm.
You know him, but he wished to remain anonymous, I think, just to be. But he asked, what are your main influences regarding the art itself, and regarding labels who tried to keep some kind of particular visual identity throughout their art.
I mean, it depends if I'm doing it. There is the odd, like, some artists will submit artwork to me or work with me. Like, they'll send me images to kind of like manipulate. So sometimes there's collaborative ones. Sometimes people do send an image, but I usually ask that I do the layout or whatever, and that's partially the reason to keep it consistent. For me, it's like, I want something that shows that it's like a family of this label, but still I try to make things quite individual to each artist, so that it's like kind of like throttling both sides of this kind of like template to uniqueness to the artist. And I hope I'm coming across by, like that is coming over okay doing that. But that's
sure, I think it is.
That's kind of my aim. And with the zine is somewhat similar. Like I try to keep a consistent cover. I think the early days, Stephen and Noah would submit an image for me to work with, and then I do the flaps. I try to. The zine is like probably slightly modeled after like old like library journals or something like that. Like they're a little different, but that kind of like, I don't know. There's not going to be like a picture of an artist on the front or something like that. You know what I mean? Like, it's just,
yeah.
At this point, it's not that. And a lot of the images are stuff that I take. Like, I'm always going around taking pictures of things that kind of like break down or rot or abandoned places. And then, was there an influence in this question? I can't remember. Sorry. The question was like,
well, the question is if you have any particular art influence.
So, like, I like all kinds of art, but like, if someone's asking specifically like about like how I break things down or distress things or whatever, I don't use like I'll rarely use a printer or like photocopying or like old Xerox style. The odd time I'll do it. Most of the things are broken down with other things that are broken down in the environment, if that makes sense. So like when I went to art school, there was a designer named Hans Rudolf Lutz who documented a lot of things that are like commercial and how they break down in environments, whether this be like weather or rain or sun or people graffitiing it or whatever. So it's just kind of like he kind of documented quite a bit of that stuff, and I got kind of turned on to him when I was a student, and I just started documenting how things broke down. And my phone is just like littered with the stupidest thing. Like, someone stole my phone, it would be like just like I don't know, like I even like look at like how like, street markings and stuff like that break down. So everything that's distressed is not distressed from like a photocopier machine or whatever. Like, I'm using other pieces of distressed things to break down images.
It's naturally distressed or environmentally or whatever. So
yeah, so there's kind of like the decision. There's like a huge element of chance with these breakdowns, if that makes sense. Yeah, it's like,
yeah.
So I'm kind of like isolating chance.
Can you describe that a little bit more in detail? I mean, that's that process. I mean,
that process.
Are you like yourself manipulating things to break down? Are you rusting things? Are you documenting things and then using them?
I would say, I mean, I shouldn't say that. Like, I wouldn't say I rust things or anything like, but like sometimes, like the odd time, I have aged things. Like, sometimes I printed them out and like aged them in sun or dirt, coffee, whatever, whatever things that kind of, so there is sometimes that, but a lot of the times too, it's like, because I work in graphic programs all day. So it's like, so when you see an image, there's probably about 20 variations of distressed pieces. And sometimes they're usually from, you can't tell that, but it's like sometimes they're pulled from certain areas so that it's almost like if you documented like how like a poster breaks down or something like that. So there's like, I might collect 10 of that same poster or something like that and then like overlap it, or it's different each time, but it's usually involved with quite a few layers of different variations of distress. But I'm
Crazy.
using kind of the outdoor environment to kind of break it down.
Are you in a pretty rural environment?
Halifax is a larger city, but like there's a lot of rural environment. I'm originally from like a steel coal mining city. It's about 5 hours from here. So I grew up in Sydney, which was quite a kind of rustic looking place. Yeah, for sure.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah, a lot of industrial, but there's a lot of like old war forts and stuff like that. Like that whole like battery defense system from U-boats in World War II and stuff. So all those things are all there and rotting and falling into the sea. And I'm usually there a lot visiting friends and family, but there's a lot of things in Nova Scotia in general that's probably like, yeah, falling apart outside of the city. But I also document things in the city. I don't know. It's like everything. Yeah.
How long have you been fascinated with this Decay, and how long have you also been interested and involved in experimental and noise music?
I don't know where the Decay started from. I definitely can think of like punk rock records that you like photocopy artwork or different things like that. So like I'm older, so I think I started listening to punk rock when I was in grade 7, which is like 1989, pre-internet. So dubbing over commercial tapes and stuff like that. So I think like industrial probably started getting introduced to me in the 90s. In Sydney, there was a band that had 2 members originally from Sydney that I think they went on to Montreal and Toronto, industrial band called Ficus. And I think some of my interest with them, or like, I remember making like a tape trade of like whatever industrial music I had. So that, I think Bill Boudreau was the guy's name. He was briefly back in town in Sydney, back with his parents for a bit. He was older than me, but like he used to work at this coffee house, and it had like drama stuff, like theater, weird poetry stuff. Anyway, he did a set one time. He's like, I'm going to go up and do a set. And he just had trash cans and just like smash that. Like there's just like people sitting at tables, and he's like smashing trash cans. I think the song was called Destroy the Earth. And he was just like smashing these. So that was my friend. I was just like, this is nuts. It's like, it's like pretty out there for where I was from. And it's like, also like, yeah, I think a lot of that stuff probably, early formation of like interest in experimental music probably came from that. Whatever things I can kind of get from TV. In Canada, we had Much Music, and my era of Much Music, they used to have a show on, like, they would put it on at like 1 a.m. on a Friday called City Limits. And that's where I would have saw like Einzelstadt Nubaden. I think they played Autobahn. Is that the one where they have like all the shovels?
Yeah.
And like, so I saw that
on TV.
On TV, like it'd be on like late at night, and like,
yeah, it's cool.
So like those are some of my early memories of how far back, I guess, where I started to get interest. Like I definitely played in like whatever punk and variations of alternative music that was going on, but that stuff is stuff I remember, as well as this was also on City Limits. I felt like my friend had a VHS tape of it copied, but there was one Lee Ronaldo solo album. I think it was like his first solo album. I think SST and like Crucial Blast might have put it out, but he did these like weird VHS kind of like loop things. It definitely did not sound like Sonic Youth. Like I really like early Sonic Youth for sure. Like, but this was like quite different, and it didn't sound like his, you know, I think a lot of people see him like doing the swing guitar now or whatever, but the videos almost look like a Brackage video made on VHS or something like that.
Yeah.
And I still remember like kind of seeing that stuff. So those are like really early era, like things I can kind of like grasp as to like what made me kind of slowly get into these things. I worked at a record store for like close to a decade. And by the end of it, I was like the ordering guy for like anything strange. So like, I think I just kept going down a rabbit hole, and Load Records, like Ben Macoscar, is that the guy's name that ran Load? He sent like a stack of like promos and posters. There was like Kites posters and things. And I would start to bring stuff in. There was a lot of things I couldn't get. I think my first interaction from ordering from Phil, I just messaged him to try and figure out if there was like distribution that I can get to order the stuff into the store. So at that time I would have been in my late 20s or early 30s. I remember, and I think I would like bring stuff into the store to see who in town would be like buying them. Brett Wag, he was living here then, but I didn't know him super well. I would see him, and he's a little bit younger than me, so he would come in. Some stuff that people like returned from other stores that got dumped, because we were kind of like more a flagship store. So I think there was like some release era Merzbow that came in. Which I think was the first Merzbow stuff that I probably bought was that as well. So
these images of industrial and natural decay are, I think, inherently very, they resonate with people just in general as humans. I think Decay, but I think also if you have a fascination with this type of music, I think these sounds and these images naturally go hand in hand. I think sometimes people will kind of criticize, noise aesthetics or whatever as being, all, distress, decay, Xerox, this or that. But I do think that there's like there is a reason for that. It's not just because people are just following an established aesthetic. I think it's because there's a inherent link between those sounds and those images. So, I mean, I was just wondering about when those things kind of formed for you, and if they kind of existed independently at some point, when they kind of crossed.
They probably formed, but probably like not just from noise, and not just like I definitely don't want to come across as just like, it's definitely like common imagery that's within like industrial music in general. And I don't want to be like, these definitely have to join. There's lots of different ways to kind of do that. I think visually, I definitely was interested. Like there was a lot of music I had that used distressed things, or sometimes it just had to do with like, whatever someone had on hand to kind of like create a cover, like Xerox. The whole kind of Xerox look had a lot to do with what people had to work with back in the day, and it just kind of kept carrying over. And but like visually, I think I was, when I was going to art school, I wrote 2 papers on kind of like distressed graphics, and like as graphic designers, like, I don't know, it's in everything. It's not even just that. It's like jeans. You buy a pair of jeans and they're made to look distressed. These people like, they want holes, or like people also seem to be like obsessed with like abandoned places or different things like that. And so I wrote one terrible paper and one, maybe I shouldn't say both were good because I haven't looked at it in a very long time, but I wrote 2 papers on it. One was definitely very bad and probably had some misguided. I think when I first approached, I had to write a paper for this one like design history course, and I think the prof just did not get what I was trying to like express, and I didn't know what I wanted to express. And then I think by the time I got closer to my final years, I did like another kind of like it was like an overall 1-term paper where I tried to collect why people are obsessed with kind of like distressed things or wabi sabi or like ruins or all kinds of things like that. So it's like there is a relationship, yes, but I also have I have lots of releases that don't have any distress in it, and I'm not going to be like, oh shit, this is like, it's not
Yeah.
true noise if it's not like, if it's got like a beautiful like landscape picture or
Clean
something
image.
like that. So, but it definitely became how I work, and it's maybe more just like a fascination, but you're right. They definitely like, there's a relationship. It's definitely used a lot, but I think I try to think of it with a different angle. And I definitely in general, I think about, kind of like chance a lot with things,
Mhm.
like not just visually, but also audio. And
Can you talk a little more about the chance aspect? Because that's an interesting element, and and you mentioned wabi sabi. I'm not 100% what that term means, but I think kind of like this. I mean,
yeah,
can you just ex
am I saying
expand
wabi?
on?
I'm trying to remember. Is that is the right term? It's like when something's like ugly, but people find it beautiful. Usually, fucked.
Right.
And like, it's like, you go into the home and everything's modern, but there's like one chair that looks like it's got 3 different legs, and like, a couple of like weird miscolorings and stuff like that. But it's like it becomes like an object of beauty from its like worn out age, terrible look, or you know what I mean. Like it's kind of like the Frankenstein chair, but there's beauty within that. I think it's called wabi sabi. I'm trying to remember
Yeah,
there's like a handful of different terms for that kind of like uh that kind of vision, or the definition of it. But
because I always think that's an important piece, or at least a key piece to noise and this type of music is things that happen kind of in a chance, uncontrolled or unhuman, guided in an unhuman sense. And I know there's a lot of artists throughout before the what we call noise that have worked with that. John Cage obviously being like the most
yeah,
obvious
yeah,
example
yeah,
with
yeah,
the I
absolutely.
Ching and chants and things like this. But is that something that you're like consciously influenced by and working with, or
Yeah, for me, I am. I I think about it a lot. Like everything from, I don't know, like anyone that works with like field recordings or whatever, you know what I mean? Like, I don't know, even like a lot of the times if someone's sitting down to write a set or whatever, like you're gonna have to stumble upon something. Or if you're out in the, like, if you're doing a field recording, there's definitely like, you're not gonna be able to use all the components, but it's also gonna be chance that you're gonna possibly like run into that one gem sound that you want to isolate or break down. Or so it's like, I think a lot of people don't maybe realize how much, and I'm sure some people don't have any chance in how they work at all. It's like, it's so calculated. So it's not like one thing's right or one thing's wrong. But for me, it's something I think about a lot. I think it's very interesting. It's like, so yeah, it's kind of like, yeah, you're basically trying to capture and build things from multiple pieces of chance, and then that becomes something in its own. So it's,
you described kind of earlier. I don't know if you described it as music that's different or outsider music, or kind of what fascinated with you was just like kind of music that's on the outsider edges.
Mhm.
And we can understand it to incorporate, I would say, beyond punk. I mean, I think punk would still belong still to kind of musical convention, but then if you're talking about experimental music, noise, industrial, all the different forms of that, what is the power of that, and why is it important, do you think, to embrace that? To, I mean, besides just liking it,
Mm.
but you're someone who really is involved in putting it out there, documenting it, um, beyond just making it and listening to it. You've chosen to really be someone who's involved in you've also mentioned community quite a bit. What do you think is particular about this type of music or this type of outlook on music and art that's so important?
Yeah, that's a difficult question, and I don't know. Like maybe each person's got a different reason. I think for me, like where like I think I just grew up in a small city that, like there was a lot of Celtic blues. There was a lot of, it was like you know, uh, working class. I skateboarded a lot. I still, the odd time I try to still get out there, but it's like there was like, you know, maybe like 20 or 30 skateboarders in my entire city, like growing up, which like uh, I think like punk skateboarding, kind of like industrial, whatever variations of like, because I would have grew up listening to thrash metal as well and stuff like that. But it's just like, I think it was maybe just like this like constant thing that you just didn't understand why it was a challenge to the general public. You know, like if we went into like there was a couple like 24-hour diners there. If you walked in, you just get the looks, and it just never made sense to me. And it's like, these are things that I liked. And so maybe I became more passionate on kind of like championing these things from my upbringing. I or like where I grew up. I don't know. I don't know. I don't know if I have a straight answer as to like, maybe it's like a, yeah, like a multiple reasons as to like why I I I think these things are so important. But it's like, uh, yeah,
I know
it's
it's a really, I don't know how I would answer that. I know it's a really tough question to answer, but like in let's say 2025 now, I mean, I feel like the world is in an interesting place.
yep, yep. It
Some
is.
might say bleak, some might say, worrisome, some might say, contentious.
Mhm.
I think a lot of people look at it different ways, but we're definitely at an interesting point, regardless of how you want to look at it. And I wonder, kind of like, what is now the role of this type of music, and is it more important? Is it less important? And what do you think? What do you think about its role going forward? Let's say 2025.
Hmm. It's
Do you
interesting.
see it? I mean, do you see it waning? Do you see it becoming less relevant for people, less necessary for people? More so?
I mean, maybe it's relevant when people find it. Like I find like a lot of people, quite a few people, it's stumble upon this, kind of stay here and start to want to become involved or 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 release things, and that's whether like, I don't know, the like, I'm sure there's, and there's all variations of sound art, noise, sound collage, or whatever, and there's pockets, there's things that kind of overlap, and maybe there's lots of new things kind of in the works that there's room for that to come in and out. But yeah, it's a really good question. I don't know if I have a straight a straight answer. It's definitely like it yeah, I don't know. It could change. I don't know. What do you think about it? Like, what's your
Yeah. What do I think?
it's a
I
hard
don't
thing
know.
to like, I feel like sometimes too, it's like you get in these like years of doing something that you almost like, it feels like it's just like that's part of your life. So it's just like I do this, and this, and it's like this is what makes sense to me, and it feels like there's like, it makes me feel like there's hope or whatever. Like,
Yeah.
it's definitely like,
And that might be, yeah, and that's a very valid, I think, use for it. That might be enough just as a kind of as a piece of hope or escape or
hmm,
just create, like, just something to create. But I
yeah,
also think about, when I think about, like, I don't know, five in the last 5 years, we've seen a lot of noise output, a lot of harsh noise, a lot of more sound oriented stuff that's less. I, I'm just thinking of it now. It's a little bit less content driven than maybe things have been in the past. But there's been a lot of
what,
like,
what do you mean by less content
I
driven?
don't know. I guess I would say, like, there's a lot of good noise in the past 5 or so years, like slightly pre and post COVID, let's say,
Mhm.
that's just kind of focused on sound and is not terribly, I don't want to say, it's not terribly deep in some way. It's just sound focused. And I think with things, if the world gets it's a lot of people to hold together, and a lot of people to have enthusiasm and unity over it. Like just great sounding noise records. A lot of them going out, people doing shows, people doing lots of releases, kind of focused around pure noise, and a lot of unity around that. But I wonder, like, if things start getting choppy in the world, like, either literally, like, like things becomes harder to travel, becomes harder to release music, if people start really having reasons to really dislike each other, politically or whatever,
Right.
how does that affect the art, and how does that affect the community as well?
Yeah, that's a good question. I mean, that would also probably apply to all kinds of communities too. Like, you know what I mean? Like probably not just noise, sound art. Like it's a pretty heavy, thing to think about. It's
But I think noise and sound art has a unique position because it's very, I don't want to say it's diverse, because in some ways it isn't diverse, but in some ways it is very diverse in terms of outlook, worldview, and that's kind of the appeal of it. I think, at least for me, initially, it was like discovering this type of music that was like really didn't tell you what to think, presenting you with these crazy sounds, these radical sounds, that were kind of both beautiful and ugly.
Yep.
And then, if you got deeper and deeper into it, images, even content, if you're going, that was very challenging, and a lot, and, just kind of allowed you to look at things in a kind of a gray zone way.
Yeah.
And I think that's a very important thing about, I don't want to say, maybe say, let's call it industrial culture.
Mhm.
But I think, like, that's easy to do and easy to, like, enjoy when things are all pretty, like, okay, when everything's going okay, and the real conflict isn't really there. It's easy to kind of enjoy that, but I'm just thinking, if things were to get
Yeah.
contentious, if wars broke out, for example, and I'm not trying to be a doomsday guy here, but I'm yeah, exactly. But I'm saying, like, we're I mean,
It's
it's
yeah,
there. I mean,
yeah,
wars have broken out, and I already see
yes,
that. Like, they're small ones, I mean, they're relatively small, that people
yeah,
can kind of just pretend like they don't care, or they don't affect them, or whatever. But I
yeah,
mean, if things were to break out in a bigger way, for example, that's just one example. That's a nice extreme example.
mm,
How does that affect the way people create art within this subset? I mean, it's not like punk, for example, where it's like punk has a. This is the end of part 1 of the interview with Chris Gibson. If you want to see or listen to the full version of this episode, which is about 2 hours long, go to patreon.com/White Centipede Noise. By doing that, you also support the podcast and support everything that goes on in the future. Thank you.